eager to answer all of your questions on researching historical fiction and any other subject you feel she'll be able to help you with. Just pop your questions into the comments section of our Facebook page. Kathleen taught a writing workshop for the Somerset Festival of Books in 2019 at the Somerset Historical Society. Each year, the festival hosts 2 separate workshops for advanced and beginner writers alike. In addition to Kathleen, our expert faculty has included Don Heelan, Susan Mayer, and Timmons Isaias. If you're a writer, we hope you'll join us for the writing workshops in 2021, pandemic permitting. I'd like to take a moment to mention a few library events happening in our festival counties. The Somerset County Library is holding a digital event on how to create a resume. That's tomorrow morning, September 24th at 9 a.m. Useful for students attending virtually, the Bedford County Library is offering homework help around the clock through tutor.com for library card holders. Very useful. It's also currently holding a story walk around historical Bedford. The Ebensburg Cambria Public Library is hosting a storybook potato patch. Decorate a potato as your favorite storybook character and drop it off at the Ebensburg Library by tomorrow, and it'll go on show this Saturday during Ebensburg's Spud Stroll, being held this year in place of Potato Fest. And next week, the Cambria County Library is hosting 3 events in honor of Banned Books Week. 2 are virtual presentations featuring Jamie Cassidy, daughter of Neil Cassidy, and memorabilia collector Jack Rossetti. Then on Saturday, October 3rd, the Chameleon Bookstore in Johnstown is hosting a banned book event. Make sure you follow your local library to see all the wonderful things they're up to and to make a donation to support their continued services. The links to donate to the Festival of Books County Libraries are on our homepage at www.festivalofbooks.org. And now it's time for me to hand you over to Sharon to formally introduce tonight's author.
Thank you, Hillary. Kathleen Shoop's best-selling novels have earned various awards in the Independent Publishing Book Awards, the IPPY, Eric Hoffer Book Awards, Indie Excellence Awards, Next Generation Indie Book Awards, and Reader's Favorite. Kathleen has been featured in the USA Today and the Writer's Guide to 2013. She coordinates mindful writing retreats and is a regular presenter at conferences for writers. Tonight, Kathleen will discuss with us the research that undergirds her various historical series. The Letters series, inspired by a set of 300 140-year-old family letters. The Donora Story Collection, inspired by a fascinating still town outside of Pittsburgh, featuring the infamous 1948 Killing Smog, the Musial family, and others who lived there in the 1900 through 1950 heyday. And the Brashear Series, inspired by Pittsburgh, PA couple John and Phoebe Brashear, who developed telescopes and lenses that are still in use today. Kathleen, do you have any good news to share with us?
I do. Love Under the Stars, which is the first book in that Brashear series, is going to launch next Tuesday, the 29th. So that's exciting good news for me for now. Okay, can I click on the share screen? Is that, and then I'll start?
Excellent.
Okay, I hope I do this right. Okay, you guys can see? Okay, first I want to say thank you for having me here, and I really appreciate Sharon and Hillary and Misty, and I wish we could all be together. That would certainly be a lot more fun, and I know this is the safest way for us to do it now. So thank you everyone for coming who is here out in Facebook land. So, okay, I'm going to get started. I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about the letter series, the Donora Story Collection, and the Brashear Series, and sort of the inspiration behind each of those, and some of the specific books in those series. And I'll start with the series that started me off as an author, at least in fiction. So the letter series, and those books are inspired by family letters of mine from way back. We have two sets. We have a set of love letters that's the really old set of letters, the 140-year-old letters. And then we have a set of about 200 letters from about 20 years after that. So the love letters between my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather are beautiful. You know, they were separated during their engagement. And, you know, back in the 1800s, people often had short engagements that were, you know, decided upon minutes after meeting. And that's sort of what happened with them. Whatever attraction held for each of them, they took a year of basically courting by letter. And I have all of Jeannie's letters to Frank, but I don't have Frank's letters to Jeannie. But they're beautiful, just full of all sorts of hope. And they were planning to go be pioneers so that they could homestead and have that patch of land that the government was giving. And, you know, they would start their family and everything would be great. And so I read that set of letters and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. And I said to my mom, I'm like, oh, but what happened then? And she's like, oh, she said he left her with 6 kids and they got divorced. And then she had to spend the rest of her life trying to make a living on her own. And by then it was the 1900s, but still a very difficult time. So it was just amazing to me that the beautiful letters could have ended up having the couple have such a terrible ending. And so I figured the story was in between all that. So that's what started the series, and I wrote the last letter, and I never intended it to be a series, but so many readers wanted to know more that then I wrote the next 4, and there's one more, the Garden Promise. Here, wait, I'll show you. Well, the Garden Promise isn't up there yet. But these 4 are written, and then The River Jewel is a prequel, because again, a certain character who shows up starting in the road home, I guess has created a lot of interest with readers, and they wanted to know more. So what I did was go back in time before there was even a letter series and wrote the River Jewel, and I'm going to talk more about that. Just to give you an idea, of course, now we Facebook, everything's instant communication. This is one of the letters, the love letters. You can see the beautiful paper. I'm gonna zoom in here for a minute so you can see the paper was expensive, and you can look at the words how Jeannie wrote across the paper all the way down and on the back, and then she turned it. And you can see that she wrote the other direction. So in order to save paper, that's what she did. Hold on, let me get back to my percent here. Okay. So what came after the first book was The Road Home, The Kitchen Mistress, and The Thief's Heart. And again, like I said, The River Jewel brought in the origin story of a character named Pearl. So as I wrote these stories, the jumping off point are the real letters from my family, but then I fictionalize it. So, you know, for just like anyone has to do with novel, you've got to up the stakes. And I'm aware of some of the troubles and conflicts between the family members from the letters, but of course there's so much I have to make up in order to make it work for a novel, so that, you know, readers are not, so that they don't feel like they're reading just a bunch of facts. Now, I did publish the love letters under My Dear Frank is the title. And it's funny because people are confused when they read it, because they think it's going to be a novel, even though it says clearly it's the letters. But then some of the reviews say it was just letters. I'm like, yes, it is just the letters. So this is my, this would be after Jeannie and Frank got divorced and he left her and went off to find another wife. But that is her. She is 48 years old in the photos. You can see the woman sitting in the middle with the gray hair. So people aged very differently back then, but you know, they lived on the prairie for I think 6 or 7 years before they came back to Des Moines. And then, of course, that was after having children. A child died, blizzards, the whole bit. So you can imagine why people aged a lot quicker back then. And that's Jeannie's father sitting beside her, and those are all their children who were alive. But in the second set of letters, near the end of her life, she had a stomach cancer and she died at 48. Her kids, you can see in the letters, are finally realizing how much she did for them to keep that house. I guess paying taxes was very difficult back then at that point, especially when you're just piecemealing money together. So it was very difficult for them. Oh, and it is funny, in that second set of letters, which are not nearly as beautiful as the love letters, Jeannie was very honest about her children and their limitations, and their good and the bad. And the son who was named after her husband, Frank, who they then called Gail, I'm assuming she just didn't want to call him Frank, because it made her think of her husband. She referred to him as a first-class loafer, and she said even once, I won't be taking in any boarders until, while Gail is around, he would make an angel disobedient and unruly. So he gave her a lot of trouble. And Dorothy, who is one of the girls sitting down, gave her a lot of trouble too. So, and she wrote a lot about them. Okay, so the prequel for the letter series was really fun to write, because I didn't have to try to wedge in the threads from the original series that was never supposed to be a series. So this one I could just do what I wanted with it. And Pearl is the character introduced in The Road Home, who so many readers loved. So what I did was create the story around how she was born. And it is one of those strange research happenings where I discovered I was going to make her mother a fisherwoman, and then I started investigating what kind of fishing they would have done in the area, in the rivers, and I came across this industry, of mother of pearl industry, that supplied buttons for America from, I don't know, the end of the 1800s all the way through 1950 or so, and I just couldn't believe it because I had named Pearl, you know, years before, and then discovered this connection to what I was already halfway doing anyway. So it was an exciting, inspirational point for me. So it was a really fun book to write. And then my second series that I'll talk about is the Donora Story Collection. And if you're from Pittsburgh, you might be familiar with Dinora, or you might be from Dinora, or the Mon Valley somewhere. These stories are tied together by the town, and there's 2 more that will be written in this series that the covers aren't up. But After the Fog, again, I didn't start off doing this as a series. After the Fog was about the 1948 Killing Smog in Dinora, and it is the event that was the impetus for the EPA and the Clean Air Act. It was the first really government studied industrial accident in the country, where there was a temperature inversion that locked in all the smog from the 3 miles of mills along the shoreline. And the result, this was during Halloween in 1948, and the result was people, half the town got very ill, and then there were 21 immediate deaths, but then there were many deaths that followed that are not included in that original list, but they very much were tied to the smog. But I use that smog timeline because it's so well documented to as an anchor for the personal story. And again, it's completely fictionalized in the book. And I'm so lucky I have the Dinora Historical Society and Smog Museum. They are so generous with their information and their resources for me, and I've been very, very lucky. And then book 2 in the series is The Strong Man and the Mermaid, which is inspired by Stan Musial's parents. His father was a Polish immigrant, and his mother was American. But when they married, and they had to have a secret wedding, when they married, according to a law that was in place at the time, she lost her American citizenship, because when a woman married an immigrant who had not been naturalized yet, you had to take on your husband's, wherever his loyalties were, and they considered them loyalties till you switched over. So that was a interesting plot point in the book. But I used the information I found in Stan Musial's autobiography and any mentions of his parents to kind of build their characters. Also lots of research on male Polish immigrants at the time. And again, the Dinora Historical Society has been a big, huge help. Again, the town is a character as much as any of the people are in the books, and that's what ties these together. And that's why it's called a collection instead of a series. So, because it jumps, as you can see, around in time periods that most series probably don't. And then book 3 that I am working on now, which hopefully it'll be out in winter. That is about Stan Musial's childhood. And again, I drew from his autobiography, from biographies. There's a lot of information about him. And again, research about Depression era families, Dinora families, what everybody went through during the Depression that was universal in a lot of ways. He was extremely talented and just a very generous person, an incredible person, and from the time he was young to when he died. So while I, of course, have to show some development for him as he grows up and sort of fully realizes his talents and what that means for his life choices, there was a lot of information to draw from with his autobiography, especially. That it's a great read for me anyway. Okay, so then book 4 and 5 that'll be connected by Dinora is The Circus Dancer and The Undertaker, and those will hopefully be soon. It's hard to write about real people. I think those two will come quicker because I'm really trying to balance the truth with the fiction that makes it readable for people who are not interested in a biography. So when you're writing about a town, when a town is a character, you need to understand the mindset and values of the people, places, events, and the things in each town. And that sign right there, the Dinora next here is the best town in the USA, I guess really encapsulates the way they viewed the world at the time. They were very proud of the work they did for the country, but also not so arrogant as to not to allow you to have your best town. One of the things I do are collect artifacts depending on the story I'm writing, and that piece of slate fell off a roof of a synagogue, and I picked it up and took it. And I use it sort of as a like a coffee place I put my coffee or something, but it's a good reminder of the town itself. And then the nails, one of the people I interviewed for After the Fog gave me those. He worked there at the American Steel and Wire division, and Mary, Stan's mom, who's the main character in The Strong Man and the Mermaid, worked in the nail factory, and she took the burrs off the end of the nails. That was her job, and they are tiny, and it's just interesting to hold them and imagine the work then she was doing with these tiny little nails. I mean, I'm sure they were all sizes, but this group of them was small. And something to keep in mind when a town's a character. If you think of Pittsburgh, we still think of ourselves as being steel strong and working class, hardworking, but so much of what has rescued us has been tech and medical industry and medicine itself. And it's important that you know, though, if you were writing about Pittsburgh, whether contemporary or historical, what the mindset is at the time. And it's those little nuances that will help your story, set your story apart and show that you really do know the people who were living there. It just helps create mood. And this is in Dinora, just to give a hint of the hills and up the mountainsides are so steep, they can't have sidewalks, they have stairs. And here is a garden during the Depression, and you can see that the mills did not operate fully during the Depression, but they still did produce some steel at the time. But you can see they had a garden, and it was guarded by one of the characters in the book The Magician, and that is a view of it. And it's very dark and gloomy, but they made the best of it, put it that way. And then here's a glimpse. That's an aerial view of Dinora, similar to so many places in the Pittsburgh area, with the river, you know, wrapping around part of land, and that's what feeds all the mills. All around that oxbow is the 3 miles of the mills, and you can see the zinc mill, all the white smoke going across the river, poisoning the people in Webster. And then when it was about to rain, the wind would blow back the other way, and the soot would, or the smoke would go up the other side. And actually right across from there, but up the hill, is where Stan lived for a lot of his life, on Merelda Street, which was in the house that his mother grew up in. But this is the house that he lived in when he was first born. His parents rented there, according to the census. And this is just a common, something I try to do. Dinora is very, very protective of Stan. He was such an incredibly generous person. He may be one of the only athletes. I mean, he's one of the best baseball players in history, yet his life was his family and baseball. That's it. No scandals, no trouble. I mean, there was some personal, of course, things happening with business and friends and things like that, but no, you know, not like Babe Ruth or I guess, what's his name, Ted Williams was not likable. Everyone loved Stan. His opponents loved him. The opposing fans loved him. So as I write about him, you know, growing up in the Depression without any money, you're going to have some obstacles. But I'm very careful in how I approach it to really keep his autobiography in mind as much as I can, the way he described his growing up. And again, a lot of research on the town itself, how everybody lived and managed. And even if, I mean, he never said a bad word about anybody. So even though he had that kind of attitude and approach to life, I'm sure there were very hard times. So I'm trying to balance those two things. it's not any kind of tell-all, but it is a fascinating story, the town and Stan Musial himself. So I think anytime you're writing about someone famous, I mean, I think I'm trying to be careful about how I do it. And then the Brashear series, that's the book that comes out Tuesday, and this one has been a lot of fun as well. John and Phoebe Brashear, and again, another secret wedding, and actually there's a little bit of a secret wedding in The Magician too, and these are all factual things that these come out of data and census and or wedding marriage certificates, things like that. But this couple is very interesting, and this is actually the first part of what will be. This is part one that takes you from where they meet to where they get married, and then I'm going to write the rest of it, and then I'll combine it as one book. But I kind of felt like I wanted to get something out, and there is a beginning, middle, end to their getting together. So I thought that was the perfect way to do it. But he was, he grew up, I don't even know how you, I mean, they grew up in Brownsville, which was farm-like, but his parents were very artsy and sciencey. And so he didn't have formal education the way we think of it now, but they read, they played instruments, they even traveled around in these bands and, you know, performed for people. And his mother was a teacher. So while he didn't go to school the way we think of it, they were very educated in other ways. And it was his grandfather who introduced him to the idea of the universe and the stars and the skies. And he just fell in love with it when somebody had a traveling telescope, brought it by one time, and he saw Saturn in the rings, and that was it. He fell in love. But he also, his mom wanted him to be a minister, so he got a minister's certificate, and he was a very talented millwright. And also another example of a really just great person. Like, people wanted to help him. He moved up in a steel company, got promoted repeatedly, even as a young man. I'm talking, you know, he's 19 and getting all these promotions, and you know, he's just that kind of person, very curious about the world. But then he meets Phoebe, who she had a huge family in Pittsburgh, not far from where he worked in Pittsburgh. And they met at church, and she was teaching Sunday school, and he was teaching Sunday school. And if you, let me see, I think, oh yeah, here you can see the picture of him with that floppy hair, which plays a role in the book because it looks like a bird wing. But they were really, again, his autobiography has been a huge help to me because he really goes into detail of how they met, although there's other sources that reveal the secret wedding versus, he doesn't talk about the secret wedding in his autobiography, but it's documented. And because her family did not want her to get married, they wanted her to stay at home because her older sister and brothers had all gotten married, and they wanted her at home to cook and clean, and she liked those things. So until she met John, I think she was satisfied with that. And then things started to change, and it's just a really fun story. And again, even though if you don't love historical fiction, you probably would like this book. It's pretty quick moving, and it's a lot of fun. Okay. Oh, well, yep. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about bookstores and libraries. And how important I think they are to a community and reading itself. And I think sometimes people don't realize how psychologically difficult the reading process is. Researchers don't even know exactly what we do to be able to read, to put all those squiggly lines together into something that's meaningful. But it's as complicated as conducting a symphony. but we don't think of it that way because so many of us are expert readers, but there are so few expert conductors. So I just want to remind everyone not to take it for granted just because we can all do it. And anyone who knows someone who struggled to learn, we can't all do it. It's a very difficult process for somebody who doesn't get it. There's lots of instructional stuff with that. And then, you know, reading, part of why I love it is it gets information in the hands of every man. The printing press changed everything. It made all the secrets available. It made, you know, dispersing information beyond having to stand in front of someone and tell them what the info was. It gives you access to the world. It's also a bridge builder, you know, especially in times like this where things are tricky with the world. I see more and more people that they still can talk about a book they both love. Same with mothers and daughters. I think that can be a way to talk about the world and or whatever story you read that takes all the pressure off of whatever it is that makes those relationships hard. So I think it is one of the greatest things that we do as people, and I wish people did more. I saw some statistics that I forget what the percent was of people who don't read after high school, and it's just astonishing to me because there's just so much to benefit from, and it's an escape, especially, you know, during times like this. People who like historical fiction, I often hear, you know, they like that they're learning something too. And, you know, it's interesting because it's in the past and we probably learned whatever is written before anyway, but you forget. So that's an awesome benefit. And I just think the more you can read, the better. And there's Mystery Lovers Bookshop, which is in my town, and there's the owners who are wonderful. And then that's the library. We're lucky to have a Carnegie library in Oakmont. So, and then here's my social media stuff. I can, and then contact, I don't know if Hillary, if you want me to leave stuff up or take down after, I mean, for questions, do you want me to leave it up there?
Yeah, sure. Actually, the first question we have is about Dinora. So I don't know. You might.
Do you want me to go back?
Yeah, perhaps if we can have a picture up of Dinora, and I'll read the question. It is from Annie Matzik. She says, "Hello, Kathleen. I'm looking forward to reading your Donora series. My grandfather, Frank Urban's scrapbook coverage of the 1948 smog is part of the Donora Historical Society's collection. Wondering if you referred to it."
I'm sure that I looked through it. I mean, that's Brian and Mark, who are the historians there, have done an incredible job. And that piece of artwork is just one item that's in there. And yes, those are priceless artifacts that provide, you know, primary resources, things that, again, we forget that the world was one way, and to have a scrapbook like that is just, it's an incredible gift. And I know that the Historical Society appreciates it, and I certainly do too. Yeah.
Excellent. Oh, now
I have a question. I was wondering if weather as well, and maybe to expand out, environment also plays a role as character or symbol within most of your writing.
It does, because that is a big player in how all this industrial pollution either gets trapped or doesn't, and the darkness of the daytime. If anybody has seen the weird sunshine from the smoke from the wildfires, I think that gives you kind of a glimpse into their weird silver sun one day and the peachy glimmering sun the next day. I think that is very similar to what they might have seen. But I'm actually using weather very heavily in the Magician book as a means for me not to, again, Stan Musial never said a bad word about anybody in his household, but in general, the way the community talks here and there is that it was a rough household in some ways, and that's not atypical for families at that time who were stressed with no food and no money and no resources, and the fathers were often very rough around the edges. So I have his friends, his baseball team essentially, talk about the mood in each of their houses according to weather. So instead of somebody, every time they get together, someone being like, well, my dad was in this mood or that mood, they talk about it as weather. And the one character, the one boy, is very much into science and weather, so his nickname is the Weatherman. So yeah, that's actually a big part of that book, because it allows me to put some distance between some of the more darker parts of the story that, again, are documented for just mill town families in general. People of that time, I mean, the Depression era people, they were rough and tumble. That was a different parenting style back then. So, you know, it was different.
Excellent. I have another question. This one is from Denise. It's Kathleen, I so admire you and your ability to recognize what real life event will make a good story for you to write. Can you tell us anything about what clicks for you to know this? Or is it that you have a deep interest yourself and you're able to translate that to your reader?
Oh, thank you, Denise. Yeah, it's a combination. The whole thing that got me started on Dinora was not even my thinking. It was my mother's, because when I wrote The Last Letter, which again at the time was a standalone, I needed a disaster that was the turning point, and it was the children's blizzard of 1888, where hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, but especially a lot of school children, died when this blizzard came up out of nowhere. And that was a plot turning point and also a character turning point, the whole bit. So when I was done with that, I said to my mom, I'm like, I need another disaster. And she said, and my mother's from the West Coast, she's not even from here. She said, why don't you do the Donora death smog? And I was like, oh, I don't even know what that is. And she said, just look it up. So I did. And then I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. And I think it was right around the time of the 60th commemoration of it, you know, that I started researching it and met with historians, and then, you know, to get a glimpse into this town, what it was like. I mean, it was amazing and fascinating, and the immigrant population, which became our American population, and their children, and the steel output. It literally built America and, you know, fought the war and the whole bit. It's fascinating. So it didn't take long. There's a million stories from that town that could be told.
Well, I'm sure there are. Another question, and I think this is referring to the Donora series also, is from Larry Ivkovich. That's that right, Larry. Hey, Kathy, did you have to get any kind of permission from Musial's estate to write this?
No, you do not need permission to write about famous people. They're in the public domain, essentially. That's the trade-off. And with that said, like I said, I'm still very careful. I guess somebody could take offense to something. I guess they could do something, I don't know, but no, I'm using primary resources right from the people themselves. I don't think I'm doing anything or saying anything or creating. I mean, of course the scenes are made up, but yeah, no. I think if I did a biography, although you can have unauthorized biographies too, but no, I think fiction, it's up in the air, and who knows, they could hate it, every bit of it. I'm assuming they've never even heard of it or seen it or anything. But am I doing something wrong in it? No, it's unfortunately for them, it's their family members are, or at least, Stan especially, are just, in the hands of the public. So.
Right. Which rolls perfectly into the next question, and this is from Janet DeCastro. She asks, even though the books are fiction, do you acknowledge research sources?
I did a lot of that in After the Fog. There's a huge list of resources, and I comment about how there's a lot of eyewitness accounts today that contradict the eyewitness accounts from 60, 70 years ago, things like that. So I kind of had to make decisions about what direction to go in. Although I used a lot of that contradiction to fuel the stuff in the town at the time, because even at that time, there were contradictory ideas about what the cause was, how to handle it. Yeah, that, wait, tell me again the question. I got off on.
It was, even though books are fiction, do you acknowledge research?
Oh, yeah. So in the back, I did a lot of that with that one, where I provided all the resources, and I talked about like those little nuanced decisions. This one, the Strongman and the Mermaid, I did less of that because it is so fictionalized. The 1948 After the Fog, like I said, I was interviewing people who were alive during it. Like, that was a very different thing than what I was making up about Stan's parents' supposed meeting. Now, there are a lot of facts, like that they were both working in the wire mill. And, there's facts involved in that were written in the autobiography and biographies and articles that I definitely adhered to. But I didn't make a list of things, because really with that story, every scene is made up, really. Again, like, it says that they met in the wire mill. It says, how he was such a strong man, even though he was short and she was tall. So I had to make up how they, like, the inner workings of how they met and things like that. And again, I was very, very, I think, very, very careful with how I did it. I hope that if any family member ever read it, they would not think it was at all somehow hurtful. But you never know. I mean, think of how many books are written about, the royal families from the beginning of time till now. I mean, no one's asking their permission to write anything.
It's true. I had one other question I wanted to ask you, and it had to do with the letter series. And you wrote the first book as a standalone. So did you cover most of their life in that, or
No.
only a part of it? And then how did you decide where to cut each one off?
Well, let's see. The letter series, the first one, it has two plot threads. One is in 1905 and one is in 1887 and 88. And then the 1905 one, I have the mother and daughter sort of making amends after being estranged. And then the 1887 and 88 thread explains the whole coming apart, at least for that period. I decided I wanted those two ends because of the two sets of letters. And again, I wasn't thinking at the time that I would ever write another book related to this. So I kind of looked at those as endpoints. You have the romantic love letters, and then you have the result that wasn't good. so I kind of tied it all together, but then people still wanted to know more. So then I was kind of stuck because I'm like, oh, well, I killed off some people who I probably shouldn't have if I was going to do a series, things like that. But I mean, it's worked out. I'm not sure it's a perfect series at all. Like for people who, if you plan a series, this would not be how you did it. But I've taken the approach of the idea, if did anyone see Wicked, where, you know, the Wicked Witch has this whole other life you don't even imagine until you see that play or read the book, and you're like, oh my gosh, she was alive, she's the, you know, there's all this stuff that happens that's hidden if you just read The Wizard of Oz or just see that movie or that play. So I saw that play with my daughter, and that kind of gave me the freedom where I was like, okay, I know how to do it now. I just need to go like down a rabbit hole in a certain point of time with whatever's happening with these people. Then it doesn't have to be a perfect fit with the first book, although some readers do find that annoying. But you know, it was either write it or not, and I definitely wanted to keep writing them. And then I made a strategic error with The Thief's Heart, which I didn't know at the time, of course, was an error, where I wrote The Kitchen Mistress, which is the third book, from the one daughter, Catherine's, point of view. And it's how she gets together with her husband, and plus everything going on with her mom. And I mean, it's a big book, so there's a lot of plot lines there. But her brother, Tommy, is in it, and the reader sees a little bit of what he's up to. He's getting in trouble. But then I thought, okay, I'm going to write book 4 for that same time period, but from his point of view. And I'm like, that'll be really interesting. But first of all, I had pulled the book apart because it got so long, and I took his thread out from his point of view to make his own book. And it was the hardest book I've written yet, because, you know, they say renovating a house is worse than building one from nothing. That same, I think, goes with the book. It took me so long to get this book where I wasn't stepping on anything that was in the book before, but there were some parts, because it's from Tommy's point of view, that the reader would know is familiar from the first, but it was from his point of view, so you're seeing it completely different. But readers are not loving that book. And I guess it depends. If someone picks that up and reads it, because you can read them all as standalones, those people like it, fine. But it's kind of annoying to some of the people who've read all 3 of the first 3, because even though it says very clearly this is Tommy's point of view, same period of time, they're still annoyed. So I don't know. But you know, it's a learning experience. And the next one that I also pulled out the thread is the mom's point of view. That's going to wrap the whole thing up. But I learned my lesson. I'm not going to show that same time period. I'm going to have her move forward. So it was a good lesson.
Very good lesson. So can I ask you where our viewers can purchase your books?
Yeah, Mystery Lovers has them. Anywhere online, Barnes & Nobles. Some Barnes & Nobles in Pittsburgh have them, but it depends on the timing. And then, but anywhere online, Amazon. But Mystery Lovers is probably the most consistent brick and mortar store that has them.
And I know you've mentioned it already, but because we are so tied into libraries, I'm going to ask you again, what is your favorite library?
Well, I mean, Oakmont Library, I love. You know, my kids have spent lots of time in it. It's beautiful. They do a lot of community outreach. I mean, libraries have changed so much in the last 20 years. They offer so much in the way of community services beyond the books. I love the Oakland Carnegie Library, and it's on University of Pittsburgh's campus. And then The one that's probably dearest to me is the Shaler North Hills Library, because that was my growing up library, and it's been redone and expanded. But when I go in there, there's this set of steps where the librarian used to sit, and then we all sat down below during story time. And every time I walk in there still, I'm like, it puts me back in that time period instantly. And they have done a great job of really, again, adapting to the way things are, where people are reading more electronically, but they have still wonderful books, but they have also expanded into more community-oriented services and events.
And do you have any special messages for our viewers?
I would say just keep reading and buying books. And if you can't afford them, get them at the library. Or if you know you want to try something that it's not your typical genre, go to the library, borrow, trade with friends. But then, support authors, because it takes a lot of time to write them. And then, sometimes they sell a lot and sometimes they don't. And we appreciate book readers and book buyers more than we can ever say. So you readers are very much appreciated.
Well, I'd really like to thank you, Kathleen, for being with us on this virtual one. And I sincerely hope that you can be with us next year, hopefully, when we have it in person in Ebensburg, Pennsylvania.
That would be awesome. Thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kathleen. It's been absolutely wonderful. And can I ask you, I think there is at least one more question that we haven't had time to answer. So after we're done, would you be able to go over to the Facebook page and
Oh yeah, sure.
if you're gonna answer any more questions?
Is it just, oh, okay. So just at the bottom of the thread, sort of, or scroll through it?
Yes, yeah. When you find the video, you'll see comments and questions, and I think viewers will really appreciate that.
Okay.
So thank you so much. So next week's author will be Marianne Spampinato. She's a memoir writer. So I hope you'll tune in for that. So thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Sharon, and thank you everybody at home for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you, everyone.